Chapter 8. The next day Matt's throat was so sore he had to stay home from school. He lay in bed thinking about the school play. How could it go on? Without someone to say his line, the whole play would fall apart. As Matt fretted, the door to his room suddenly opened. Mrs. McGuire entered carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of soup on it. "Here, honey, this should make your throat feel better," she said gently. "And I removed the carrots, just how you like it." "Thanks," Matt whispered hoarsely. He looked at the soup. It was chicken noodle, his favorite kind, but he didn't feel very hungry. Something was still bothering him. "Mom, I'm really sorry about the way I acted about the acting thing," he whispered. His mother smiled and touched her finger to his lips. "Shh," she said. "Don't speak." Matt smiled gratefully at his mother. He knew that was her way of telling him everything was okay. Suddenly he felt ravenous. He picked up his spoon and was just about to take a sip of soup when the doorbell rang. "Ah," Mrs. McGuire said, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "The doorbell. I'll get that." Matt winced. Mother's. A few moments later the door to Matt's room opened again and Lanny walked in. He came over to the side of the bed and gazed at Matt, his eyes filled with concern. "No, Lanny," Matt whispered. "I was a jerk for making you do all those things for me." Lanny pursed his lips and nodded. "I'm sorry, Lanny. You're right. I let it go to my head," Matt said sincerely, "but now I can barely speak." Lanny raised his fist and tapped it twice against his own chest sympathetically. Matt shook his head. "No, Lanny. You have no idea what it feels like." Lanny lifted his chin bravely. "You do that for me?" Matt asked, sitting up in bed. "You'd perform in my place?" Lanny smiled and nodded. "Thanks, Lanny," Matt murmured, then added, "break a leg." As Lanny left, Matt settled back down under the covers, relieved to know that the show would go on. At that moment, over at the junior high, Lizzie, Miranda, and Gordo were sitting in the back row of bleachers in the gymnasium, watching cheerleading practice. On the gym floor, Claire bossed the other cheerleaders through a new routine. 15 minutes into practice, Kate still hadn't arrived. "Do you think she'll show?" Miranda asked, anxious for the real show to start. With a chance to put Claire in her place in front of all the cheerleaders, I think she'll show." "She'd better show after all that time we spent with her," Lizzie answered. "Can I remind you guys that we're here to support a girl who told us that she would never be friends with us, ever?" Gordo asked. "But she's still better than Claire," Miranda said. As I watched Claire set down her pom-poms and turned a perfect cartwheel, Lizzie wondered if Claire would even be impressed with Kate's one-arm tricks. "What if this doesn't work out?" she asked. "It's gotta work," Gordo replied. "I can't eat one more lunch on the ground." "We'll know soon enough," Lizzie said, pointing to the door. "Kate's here." Kate strode into the gym, her chin held high, her left arm wrapped in a bandage still hung from the sling under her shoulder. Ignoring the surprised looks of the other cheerleaders, she walked straight up to Claire. Claire placed her hands on her hips. This is cheerleading practice," she said frostily, "and you are no longer a cheerleader." "Oh, what?" Kate asked, her eyes widening in mock horror. "This is a new cheerleading captain. Is the new cheerleading captain afraid of a little competition?" "Competition," Claire laughed. "Anything you can do, I can do better." She folded her arms and tilted her chin challengingly. "Bring it on." Kate smiled. This is what she'd been waiting for. Slowly she walked over to the exercise mats. Turning to face the room, she raised her right arm above her head. She took 2 steps, then dove forward into a one-handed front walkover, followed quickly by 2 cartwheels. Her legs were perfectly straight, toes pointed like a ballerina. Spinning on her heel, she did another one-handed cartwheel and a round-off back to the corner where she'd started. But Kate wasn't done yet. She paused for a moment to focus, then, taking a few running steps, she suddenly flipped over in an aerial cartwheel using no hands at all. The cheerleaders gasped. Claire's eyes bugged out in astonishment. Lizzie, Miranda, and Gordo rose to their feet, clapping and whistling. The aerial was the hardest stunt Lizzie had taught Kate, but Kate landed it perfectly. Grinning, Kate brushed her hair from her face, then she whipped around to face Claire. "Your turn," she said. Claire licked her lips nervously and glanced over at the other cheerleaders. They stared back at her, waiting to see what she would do. Trying to regain her composure, Claire smiled smugly at Kate, then walked over to the corner of the mat. She took a deep breath and raised her arms. The room was so silent you could have heard a pom-pom drop. Claire took a running start into a round-off, but as she landed, her foot twisted beneath her. She stumbled and fell, sprawling full length onto the mat. "Ah!" she cried. Everyone stared at her silently. When Claire rose to her feet, she was clutching her wrist. She shuffled over to the cheerleaders. "Guys, I think I hurt my wrist," she whimpered. Kate looked at Claire's wrist, which was already starting to swell. "That doesn't look good," she said coldly. "I guess you can't be a cheerleader with a bad wrist, which means you can't be a cheerleading captain." Without another word she turned to the other cheerleaders. "Ready? Let's go," she called. With Kate in the lead they began to practice another routine, leaving Claire standing alone. In the bleachers, Gordo looked at Lizzie and Miranda. "I can't believe we helped Kate," he said. "We gave her back her superpowers. Now she can crush us again. What was I thinking?" "Great idea, Lizzie," Miranda said, shaking her head in disbelief. "I just can't believe that she didn't learn anything from the whole thing," Lizzie said, as they climbed down the bleachers. "She treats people like dirt. They treat her like dirt. And now she treats them like dirt again." Miranda shrugged. "It's the circle of life. Until the natural order of things has been restored," Gordo said. Lizzie laughed. She put her arms around Gordo and Miranda's shoulders, and as Kate and the rest of the squad continued to cheer, the three friends headed for home. Chapter 9. The next day at lunch, Lizzie, Miranda, and Gordo sat at a table in the quad, happily munching slices of pizza. Order had been restored to Hill Ridge Junior High. Now that Kate was head cheerleader again, kids were free to walk down all the hallways, use all the bathrooms, and sit anywhere they wanted in the quad, except the cheerleaders' table, of course. From where she was sitting, Lizzie could see Kate in the usual spot at the head of the table. She was smiling and talking with the other cheerleaders. At that moment, Claire entered the quad, carrying her lunch tray with one hand. Her right arm hung in a sling. Lizzie, Miranda, and Gordo walked as she shuffled past them, looking at the ground. Looks like Claire sprained her wrist," Lizzie said. "If you have any great ideas about helping Claire, count me out," said Miranda. Lizzie shook her head. "I'm just happy to be out of the hallway," she said with relief. They watched as Claire walked over to a corner of the quad and sat down alone at a table. A moment later, Kate stood up. She walked over to Claire. "Here we go," said Miranda. "So what do you think she's going to do for revenge? Pudding as a hat, applesauce down the shirt?" "I'll take humiliation in front of the whole school for $500, Alex." "It's never going to change," Lizzie said, finally feeling defeated by all the meanness. "I don't even know why I bothered." "Because you're a good person, Lizzie," Gordo said reassuringly, putting his arm across her shoulder. They watched as Kate said something to Claire. Then she picked up Claire's tray and carried it back to the cheerleaders' table. Claire rose from her seat and followed her. Lizzie stared in disbelief. "What's she doing?" she asked. Miranda frowned. "You don't think—" "It couldn't be," said Gordo. But sure enough, Kate and Claire sat down next to each other at the cheerleading table. Kate whispered something to Claire, and they laughed together. "I can't believe it. Kate actually learned to be a decent friend," Lizzie said in amazement. Just then, Kate looked up and saw Lizzie watching her. The two girls locked eyes for a moment, then Kate smiled a genuine smile. Lizzie smiled warmly back at her. For a second, it seemed that Kate really had transformed into a decent friend. But just then, Claire glanced up to see what Kate was looking at. When she saw Lizzie, she wrinkled her nose, making a face as if to say, "Whatever." Immediately, Kate stopped smiling and made a face at Lizzie, too. She went back to talking with Claire. Lizzie rolled her eyes and shook her head. "Some things would never change."